that was the method to our madness in thinking about attribution. I'm going to take just a little bit more time just to help you see what those boil down to for these crops. I've already talked about product in terms of the difference between introducing a completely new crop versus varietals versus not introducing a new crop. Production technology, the high definition is soup to nuts. Introduced to improve production practices, planting, pest, water management, everything. So sort of like, these, we are starting from ground zero. Or in the case of the medium example in the middle, we dramatically change 2 or more production stages. And then finally for market, in the high case, we played a critical role in opening the market. In the middle case, we basically expanded an existing market opportunity. We can go back and look at some of those if y'all like. And here are the results. Basically, as raspberries and blackberries, raspberries basically introduced the product entirely. Remember, this is the early 1980s, the mid 1990s. Colored calla lilies. There had been white lilies that were produced and I think exported. I can't remember. So we introduced a new crop there. The others were, in the case of sweet onions, onions had been produced, but sweet onions, which I know is more as like Vidalia onions, or they're sweet onions from Washington State. Basically, they were trying to hit the market. There was a market niche that Central America could fill because of timing, seasonal timing. They produced onions, but had never produced sweet onions, much less filled that market niche of sweet onions that neither Georgia nor Washington State could fill. What else to say about this? Asparagus, it was introducing new varieties and production technologies and being a market maker. So everything is marked in green, and even though the total score doesn't lend itself to saying, there's a bright line between the highs and the mediums, we made our criterion if you had 2 or more, qualified in 2 or more high in 2 or more criteria, that was our select set of the one that we're taking as our high attribution. I mean, for us, this counted the numbers, but it got on this graph somehow. Those are the numbers in terms of the crops. You can see that asparagus was by far the largest in terms of the numbers. Sweet onions second, and blackberries, raspberries third, and colored calla lilies distant. The countries were, as I said, Costa Rica, Peru, and Guatemala. And I'll give you the numbers here. The biggest was Costa Rica. The biggest was Panama, and Costa Rica, etc. So even though they may have done, and this is what's happened since 1995. So if you think about those, you think about Costa Rica and Panama. Well, they've captured these gains, and the poorer countries, let's say, Guatemala certainly has, but Honduras, you see, and El Salvador are very small in terms of how much they've gained from this program. And those are the vagaries of this kind of work. You don't own it forever just because you were doing it successfully once. Let's see. Let me go ahead and cut to lessons learned. This was Chemonics' first and its own internally funded effort for doing an impact. I'm going to call it an impact assessment. I think we're trying to open paths in terms of doing this work and how to do it, and sensitize our own staff, both in terms of their execution of existing projects and how they can think about projects afterwards. I mean, we're accustomed to doing that for different reasons than you folks, in terms of we're always trying to make a claim about what our past what our legacy is from the work that we've done, and I think we're trying to think about ways to quantify that, do it in a credible way, open ourselves, to tell the good stories, but I think open ourselves to the stories that are more open for debate and question. That's the commitment of Richard Dryman, our president. He was the person who was the advocate of this. Bruce Brower, who's not with us today, who was the chief of party and advocate of a lot of this work, has been pushing for some time. And our president said, let the cookies fall, the crumbs fall where they may. because we're, from the point of view of being development professionals, we are collaborators with you folks, and we want to understand what works and have things work that are successful, have things be successful. The other is, to me, in implementing this, there's just the simple power of looking back. This is looking back with foreign trade statistics to help us quantify that case. But, if you build something, if you produce something, and you come back 9 years later and it's not there, which I've done, I've seen, rural water supply systems that are no longer there 5 years after when you look at it, or a wastewater treatment plant that we just did another internal impact appraisal of, that thankfully was still there and working very well in Morocco. So, as much as we'd like to get up in that upper echelon of doing, rigorous impact evaluation, there are other pieces of the story that I think stand up to analytical scrutiny that just come from the mere fact of saying, it's still there 9 years later. Now can you do some sort of sorting out and make a credible case about whether the attribution is believable or not? So, those are the lessons we take. There are other issues that have been brought up in the discussion with Carrie and others. We talked a lot about this in terms of drilling down for better understanding of this circumstance. The 4 issues you see there in terms of quantifying, we talked about trying to look at how income levels that were associated with the farmers and producers, et cetera, had changed as a result of that distribution. Was it all captured by the big farmers, the big exporters, et cetera? Likewise, analogous to that, the level and composition of employment. One could look back and try to do some exercises to think about that. Capital investments, likewise. It's not just what income lands in people's pockets, how much. I think one of the things we didn't do, but we wanted to do, was find out who got involved in this and basically diversified out of this sector because they did well and they took the capital that they earned and they moved into telecom or other things. As you may or may not know, the 1990s were a period of rapid, diversification and growth in Central America in a certain extent. And so I suspect you can find some of those PROEXAG and EXITOS farmers or producers or brokers who've now moved out of that sector into something else. And it's a more interesting, intricate, maybe more sophisticated way to think about our long-term development impact. We can also look at doing business indicators. We would like to understand, why, to answer the question better, why did certain value chains succeed and why did others not succeed? Why in certain countries, why not in others? So that we can understand. It's always sort of a portfolio. You might want to take a portfolio management to your project, knowing that what's successful today might not be successful 5 years from now, or it might not be sustainable 5 years from now. So if you have a portfolio, this might be a better chance. It's just an idea. Drawing lessons learned, certainly that's critical. Thinking about multiplier effects, what were the larger economic or the economy-wide effects as a result of these income changes, et cetera. Anyway, that's our presentation. Thanks for having us here. Glad to answer questions.